Hey guys, tonight we travel back to a time when medicine was darker, dustier, and unsettlingly human. You find yourself in a cramped apothecary, hidden in a damp alleyway just off the Grand Canal in Renaissance Venice. The cobbled streets outside are still slick from last night's rain, and a low mist curls along the floor, creeping beneath the door and up your boots like cold fingers. Inside, the shop smells like dried sage, lamp oil, and less pleasantly old meat. You shift awkwardly on your feet as your master, a frail apothecary with heavy eyelids and permanent ink stains on his fingertips, instructs you to restock the shelves. It's your third week as an apprentice, and you've already learned how little you know. Most of your time is spent fetching water, grinding leaves, and staying quiet, while nobles complain about their digestion or wives inquire about love potions. But today, the task is different. Your hands are trembling slightly as you reach for a jar perched high on a carved wooden shelf. The label is worn but still legible in thick, looping black ink. Mamea. The word alone makes your stomach tighten. The clay lid scrapes as you lift it. A faint puff of brown powder escapes into the air so fine it seems to float. Before it settles on your sleeve and your skin, you sneeze. The scent is unlike anything else. Earthy, metallic, faintly sweet, and undeniably wrong. It reminds you of the butcher's stall on a warm day, mixed with candle wax and something like parchment. You weren't expecting it to be so strong, or so human. You peer inside and see the source. It's powdered flesh and bone, scraped and ground from a long dead body pulled from the sun-drenched tombs of Egypt. This is medicine, they tell you, one of the most precious ingredients in all of Europe. You hesitate, unsure whether to close the jar or keep staring. Behind you, the old man clears his throat. "Don't let it spill," he says, his voice dry as chalk. "That batch came from a nobleman, perfectly preserved. Cost a fortune." He pauses, tapping his temple with one yellowed fingernail. "They say wisdom clings to the bones. Imagine that." You almost drop the jar. There is no sarcasm in his voice, only reverence. Here, mummy literal, ground up mummy sits on the shelf beside rosewater and camphor, as though it were as normal as lavender. Apothecaries, believe it, heals bruises, migraines, seizures, melancholy, even bleeding lungs. You've never seen it do anything, except stain your hands. Still, the wealthy come daily, eager for their fix. They whisper the word like it's sacred. They pay in silver, spices, and bolts of silk. That morning, a gaunt nobleman limps into the shop with a purple bruise blossoming across his thigh. He ignores the cabinet of ointments, ignores the jar of leeches, the willow bark, even the rare saffron. He wants Mamea, only that. He pulls off his glove, exposes the skin, and nods with brittle confidence. Your master grinds a fresh pinch, mixing it with crushed myrrh and dried rose petals, as if that softens what it is. The nobleman watches with hunger not for relief, but something stranger. When he finally takes it, he doesn't blink. He dips a moist finger into the powder, lifts it to his nose, inhales slowly, and then licks it clean. There's no horror in his eyes, only hope. Behind the counter, your master chuckles faintly. "Once we believed in the four humors," he says. "Now we believe in bones." How quickly faith shifts when money's involved. You pretended smile. Your job is to keep the jars full. Every morning, you inventory the stock. Little corked vials labeled skull ash, mummy elixir, powdered priest. Some are nearly empty. Business has been brisk lately. Word has spread that your shop receives the finest specimens directly from Alexandria. Though, in whispers, you've heard rumors. Not all the mummies come from royal tombs. Some are criminals. Some were buried in sand with no rights. Some may not be Egyptian at all, but no one seems to care. Once they're dust, who can tell? One afternoon, a man in a feathered hat arrives with a parcel wrapped in linen. It's long, heavy, and gently seeping. He claims it's a shipment from Cairo. You know better than to ask questions. He accepts his payment without meeting your eyes. Your master unwraps the parcel in the back room, and you catch a glimpse of what lies inside. A hand, shriveled and blackened like a smoked fig. The fingers curled inward like it died, grasping something. The skin cracks as it shifts. You turn away. Later that evening, when the shop is quiet, you're tasked with preparing the next batch. You grind slowly, the mortar biting into your palms. Each crunch makes your shoulders tighten. And yet, no one treats this as strange. Not your master, not your customers, not even yourself. After a while, in this world, consuming the dead isn't barbaric, it's fashionable. Historians still debate whether the obsession with mummy powder was rooted in genuine medicinal theory or simply macabre curiosity masquerading as science. Was it a holdover of magical thinking or a new form of intellectual vanity? Some scholars argue it was the natural evolution of a society obsessed with the exotic, where the more foreign and ancient something was, the more powerful it became. You don't know what to believe. You just keep scooping the powder. Once, a physician asked for a blend mixed with opium and honey. He said it helped his wife sleep. Another time, a priest bought an entire jar to use in last rites, claiming it brought the body closer to the ancients. The strangest customer was a poet who dabbed mamia behind his ears before readings, convinced it helped him channel forgotten voices. There are moments when you want to scream, but you don't. You grind, you bottle, you label. And in the quiet hours, when the candles burn low and the shop smells like death warmed in a clay bowl, you find yourself wondering, whose bones are these? What name did they have? Did they die in battle, in bed, or in chains? Did they know their fate? And then you wonder what will happen to your bones one day. Will someone grind you down? Will someone sniff, lick, and call it medicine? The next morning begins before sunrise. You wake to the soft clang of church bells echoing down the narrow alleyways of Venice, still slick from a coastal fog. Your shared quarters above the apothecary are no warmer than the street below, and the fire in the small hearth has gone cold. You dress in silence, fingers stiff from the damp. By the time you make your way down to the workshop, your master is already hunched over his desk, reading a letter by candlelight. He doesn't look up. On your workbench lies a sealed scroll, tied with faded red ribbon and smudged with wax. You recognize the crest, a new order, likely from a merchant, or possibly a minor nobleman. The Florentines are fashionable and bold, always eager to display how well connected they are, and nothing says wealth in 1532 like imported medicine carved from the dead. You untie the ribbon and read the request. It's 4 or 5 vials of pulvis mammae, finely ground and mixed with frankincense, camphor, and powdered silver. For external application to bruises, the note specifies. You doubt anyone will apply it externally. You fetch the scale, the sieve, the mortar, the ingredients. This is your daily rhythm now. Every task performed with care, precision, and a quiet tension. Each step of the preparation ritual is meant to honor the Didor. At least that's what your master claims. But it doesn't feel like reverence. It feels like routine. There's no mourning, no ceremony, just trade. As you weigh out the first pinch of brown powder, your thoughts drift again to where it all comes from. Your master rarely talks about the supply chain. He has a contact in Alexandria, another in Marseille. Sometimes packages arrive already powdered, sealed in waxed parchment. Sometimes they come whole-wrapped, brittle, limbs intact. When they do, you're the one who has to unwrap and grind them. You still remember the first time. You were alone. The back door bolted shut. The room silent except for your own breath. You slice through the cloth slowly, the fabric stiff with age. The smell hit first, spiced rot, earthy and ancient. You peeled the linen aside and saw the face. It wasn't intact, not fully. The nose collapsed, the teeth exposed. One eye socket still half full with resin. But it was a face, nonetheless, and once it had belonged to someone. Your hands had trembled then, just as they do now. People don't seem to realize that behind every vial is a body, behind every pinch of medicine, a life. They speak of mamea like it's nothing more than bark, or stone, or ash. But it isn't, and sometimes you swear the powder remembers, that it clings not just to your fingers, but to your thoughts. In certain circles, mummy powder has become more than medicine, it's luxury. Its identity. You've seen wealthy women dab it onto bruises like perfume. You've seen gentlemen mix it into red wine at feasts. One apothecary in Florence reportedly sold it as a love tonic. Another in Seville advertised his blend as blessed by the breath of pharaohs. The oddest request came last winter. A Venetian glassblower asked for mamia, mixed with crushed amethyst. He said it helped his creativity. When you delivered the final product, he told you he'd dreamed of ancient deserts, of sandstorms and temples. He insisted the powder had let him see another life. Your master doesn't discourage this mysticism. In fact, he encourages it. He believes the more mystery surrounds the substance, the more people will pay, and pay they do. One small vial can fetch more than a month's rent. There are even rumors that royal courts are becoming involved. That Catherine de' Medici herself once requested a powdered rib fragment to treat her migraines. That the Polish king's physician carries a ring with a secret compartment filled with mummies. Whether true or not, such stories only add to the allure, but not everyone believes. A few voices quiet, often mocked, have started to question the practice. A physician in Prague wrote a treatise calling it the cannibalism of scholars. A French monk declared it heresy, consuming the dead for vanity. You once overheard two merchants arguing in the back alley, one calling the trade sacrilege wrapped in science, the other just laughed and counted his coins. Historians still debate whether the spread of mummeia was driven by genuine medical conviction or by morbid curiosity disguised as reason. Some suggest it was the Renaissance's thirst for the exotic, the ancient, the arcane. Others argue it was simple opportunism, a convenient way to profit off the dead. The truth, as always, likely lies somewhere murky in between. You finish sealing the 5th vial and set it in a velvet-lined box. The client has arranged for a courier, so you tie the lid closed with waxed thread and leave it by the door. Outside, the mist has lifted slightly. You can see gondolas gliding past, their silhouettes soft in the morning light. Back inside, your master gestures for you to join him at the long counter. A new shipment has arrived, he says. 2 parcels. One from Alexandria, one from a more local source, Pisa. The Pisan parcels are always less refined. He hands you the first bundle. It's tightly wrapped in oiled linen, heavier than it looks. You unwrap it slowly, revealing bone fragments, a partial foot, and what looks like a jawbone, teeth still intact. You try not to look too long. You know better now. The second bundle is cleaner, smaller. Inside is a fine powder, already sieved, pale brown and faintly sparkling. Your master lifts a pinch to his nose, inhales, and smiles. Excellent, he says. Fresh, likely noble. You don't ask how he knows. You've heard enough theories, something about the richness of the embalming oils, or the tightness of the linen wrap. You suspect he just likes the sound of the word noble. You're told to blend the new powder into the existing stock. Consistency, your master mutters. People like predictability in their potions. So you blend, you grind, you seal, and as the sun rises higher, casting pale light through the leaded windows, you wonder once again, how long will this last? How long until the tombs are empty? Until the supply dries up? What happens then? Will they turn to other sources? Will they dig closer to home? Will they turn to the poor? To the prisoners? To you? You push the thought away and return to the task. The powder must be even. The jars must be full. The work must go on. By the 3rd week, the rhythm of the apothecary has become muscle memory. You rise at dawn, sweep the floor with slow, circular motions. Check for any leaks in the ceiling. There's always one after rain, and then begin your preparations. The glass jars lining the back wall reflect the candlelight like a row of watching eyes. Pulvis dentis, equi, lacrima, papaveris, and of course, mummeia always in the middle shelf, always placed with care. You work with fewer questions now. You've learned to stop thinking too hard about the source of things. But still, the unease never fades completely. Sometimes, in the quiet, you imagine the bones whispering nothing sinister, just tired, as if even they are weary of being crushed for strangers, bruises, and passing headaches. Today, a new challenge awaits. Your master has been invited to prepare a batch of elevated tincture for a banquet hosted by a wealthy Venetian merchant. The merchant wants something dramatic, not just medicine, but spectacle. He wants a blend that tastes of mystery and invokes the legacy of Egypt itself. In other words, he wants his guests to feel like gods while drinking what used to be people. Your master assigns the task to you. At first, you're stunned. This isn't part of the usual apprentice routine. You're rarely trusted with anything more potent than dried valerian root. But he insists. A test, he says, of precision and imagination. You begin by consulting the compendium, a thick leather-bound tome filled with centuries of recipes and guesses. You find an old entry labeled Elixir of the Pharaohs, supposedly formulated by a monk who once toured Alexandria in the company of spice traders. The recipe calls for mummeia, myrrh, saffron, crushed cinnamon bark, a dash of vinegar, and grated orange peel. The inclusion of orange peel surprises you. The fruit is rare, expensive, and usually reserved for perfumes or ceremonial sweets. But the compendium suggests it balances the bitterness of the bone dust. You nod and begin the preparations. Grinding takes the longest. The mamia arrives in solid chunks. This time-darkened strips of something once human, coated in aged resin and specks of linen. You hold the first piece carefully in gloved hands, turning it under the lamplight. It smells like cloves and decay. You brace yourself and drop it into the mortar. Each rotation of the pestle feels heavier than it should, not physically, emotionally. The silence of the room wraps around you. You work slowly, carefully, until the texture resembles coarse flour. Then you sift, blend, and infuse. The aroma is rich, spiced, and earthy. When the final mixture is poured into a crystal vial, it glows faintly amber in the light. You cork it, label it in your cleanest script, and present it to your master. He sniffs it, swirls it, tastes a drop on his tongue. His face reveals nothing for a moment. Then, at last, he smiles. "Well done," he says. "They'll remember this." You feel a brief swell of pride, quickly replaced by a wave of guilt. You've made something beautiful out of someone. You don't know their name. You never will. That evening, you are invited, commanded to attend the banquet. The merchant's palazzo is a glowing monument to glass chandeliers sway from the ceiling. Gold leaf lines every edge. Musicians in velvet coats play soft music near the courtyard, and guests in embroidered masks sip wine from jeweled cups. The smell of roasted goose, orange blossom, and candle smoke fills the air. You stand awkwardly by the apothecary's side, clutching a wooden case filled with your creation. The merchant greets you both with theatrical gratitude. "This will be the talk of Venice," he says, as if you've delivered a rare treasure and not powdered remains. He parades the vial around the room, describing it as distilled wisdom from the desert and liquid legacy of pharaohs. Later, during the toast, he uncorks the bottle with a flourish and pours it into tiny crystal glasses. The guests raise their cups with delight, unaware, or perhaps entirely aware of what they're drinking. You watch them sip. You watch them smile. You watch one man close his eyes, then declare he feels closer to history. You wonder how much history has been lost in that very moment. Afterward, back at the apothecary, your master says little. He's counting coins, eyes gleaming. "They drank every drop," he says. "You've got a future in this, if you stay sharp." But your thoughts are elsewhere. You remember the texture of the powder on your palms. You remember the weight of the pestle. You remember the label you carefully inked elixir of the pharaoh's aunt. How many lies those 4 words carried. Historians still argue whether apothecaries like yours believed what they sold, or whether they simply understood what people wanted. Was this medicine, they ask, or performance? Was it healing, or high art? You've seen enough to know it was both and neither. There's a peculiar irony in it. That Renaissance medicine, with all its discoveries and inventions, still relied so heavily on myth, on the illusion that the past, once consumed, could transform the present. Even now, you hear people repeat the same lines, that Mumia retains the strength of ancient warriors, that consuming, it grants visions, that the bones of kings still whisper through the blood. You've never heard a whisper, only the grinding stone. Sometimes, late at night, you sit alone in the back room with your mortar and candle, and you try to listen, not for words, but for feeling. You stare at the powder and think of the deserts, the tombs, the quiet lives, once lived under stars so far from here. You wonder what dreams those people had, what fears, whether they'd ever imagined they'd end up on the tongue of a Venetian nobleman in a banquet hall filled with laughter. Your candle flickers, the pestle slows, and you realize the vial is empty again. Time to refill. You grow used to the silence of the dead, not out of comfort, exactly, but necessity. Each time your hands plunge into the powdered remains, each time you wipe a smudge of human dust from the rim of a bottle, you tell yourself the same thing. This is medicine. This is history. This is your role. But roles have a way of expanding. One morning, your master leaves a sealed letter on your bench before heading out for a long meeting with the Spice Guild. The letter bears the crest of the ducal palace. Inside, a request, written in elegant hand, a refined sample of Mamea for His Grace's personal physician Argent. No explanation, no dosage details, just a carriage arriving by dusk to collect it. You reread the note, your thumb running over the pressed wax. The urgency unsettles you. In your short time here, the palace has rarely made direct orders. The wealthy prefer to keep their appetites private, shielded behind intermediaries. But now they want a direct delivery. Something has shifted. You begin by preparing your tool: silver spatula, polished mortar, a new sieve. You open the storage chest where your master keeps the most refined samples. Ultrafine powder, almost grey, like ash sifted from old parchment. This batch, you recall, came from a wrapped parcel labeled Amma. The label may be real or a lie crafted to impress nobles. You no longer ask. As you weigh the powder, a memory stirs something you overheard weeks ago in the market. A whispered conversation between a priest and an alchemist, arguing whether the duke's health had declined. One said it was melancholy, another mentioned coughing blood. They spoke of failed bleedings, of prayers unanswered. "He's already tried the leeches," the priest muttered. "He'll try bones next." You wonder if this is for the duke himself, or perhaps for someone close to him. You hope, distantly, that it's not for a child. You mix the powder with honeyed wine and camphor oil, as prescribed in the old texts. The aroma is sharp, medicinal, with a sweetness that doesn't belong. You seal the vial, press fresh wax around the cork, and carefully stamp it with your master's insignia. The carriage arrives early. A boy no older than 12 stands waiting in a velvet cloak, holding a basket lined with embroidered cloth. He does not speak. You place the vial inside, and he nods, disappearing into the fog like a ghost with a purpose. That night, your master returns and listens quietly as you recount what happened. He says nothing for a long while. Then, in a voice lower than usual, he says, "There are some diseases not even the saints dare touch, and in such cases, the dead become our best hope." You don't ask what he means. Instead, you return to cleaning the workroom. The soot on the windows has thickened, and the mortar bears faint reddish stains from older mixtures. You scrub, rinse, and dry, but some residue always remains, just as some residue always clings to your mind. The next week, a new item appears in your tasks: preparation of preservation. At first, you don't understand the request, but the instructions are clear. You are to fill small cloth satchels with a mixture of mumia, dried lavender, and wormwood. These pouches, your master says, are kept under the pillows of the Dainor, stitched into burial shrouds. You wonder if they are meant to heal, or to ease the soul's passage. One Cleanta noble widow with sunken eyes and fingers stained by rose oil visits in person. She requests 3 pouches, one for her brother, one for her daughter, and one for her own pillow. "It helps with dreams," she says. "I sleep better with them close." She smelled the pouch before paying, eyes closed as if inhaling memory itself. You watch her leave, the bells on her sleeves jingling faintly. Later that evening, you'll find yourself wondering, is this truly medicine anymore, or ritual? Is this something we do for the body or for the mind? Historians still debate whether Mumia's effectiveness lay in its chemical properties or in its symbolic weight. After all, the powder contained no living remedy, no natural compound to counter fever or infection, and yet people swore by it. They felt calmer, stronger. Some claimed their wounds faded faster, their grief dulled more gently. Was it real, or belief, pretending to be truth? You begin to suspect that belief itself is a kind of medicine, and that people are willing to believe almost anything if the alternative is despair. One afternoon, a traveling scholar visits the apothecary. His cloak is frayed, and he carries a satchel full of worn scrolls. He has come from Padua, he says, to study the bones of kings. He's heard your master carries genuine samples. He speaks quickly, nervously, almost too eagerly. You're instructed to show him a few fragments, not yet ground pieces, still wrapped in linen, still whole enough to be recognized as human. You do so reluctant. The scholar's hands shake as he examines a narrow tibia, lifting it carefully from its box. He whispers Latin phrases you don't recognize. At one point, he removes a magnifying lens and peers at a crack in the bone. "This man rode horses," he says. "His bones are bowed slightly forward, and here see the notch. A healed fracture, years old." You ask what he's looking for. "Truth," he says. You don't reply. When he leaves, he thanks you with tears in his eyes. He does not buy anything. He says he's already taken enough. That night, alone in the back room, you hold the same tibia in your hands. It's light, hollow in parts. You wonder about the man it belonged to. You wonder if he ever imagined his leg bone would outlive him by centuries, would become an object of study, of medicine, of hope. You place it back gently and lock the cabinet. By now, your fingers are permanently dusted with the scent of age. Even after scrubbing with lemon and lye, you smell faintly of myrrh and something more difficult to name. Something like dry parchment and secrets left too long in shadow. You've accepted this as your scent now, the scent of someone who lives among the dead. The days blend together. Orders for Mumia arrive steadily, tucked inside wax-sealed letters or whispered across the shop counter by nervous nobles. Some come in disguise, cloaked and silent. Others parade in, bold and theatrical, proudly declaring their belief in ancient cures. While pocketing satchels of powdered kings, you greet them all with the same bowed head and cautious tone. You've learned that those who spend the most on bones are also the quickest to anger, if reminded what, exactly, they're ingesting. This morning, however, brings a different kind of visitor. A physician from Florence and smelling of rosemary water steps into the apothecary as if entering a cathedral. He walks past the standard jars and tonics, his eyes scanning for something rare. When he reaches the Mumia shelf, he pauses, hands clasped behind his back. Your master emerges from the back room and greets him by name. Apparently, the two studied briefly together in Padua. Dr. Serrano, your master says warmly, come to lecture me on the dangers of dust again. Serrano smiles. No lectures today, only curiosity. You're instructed to bring out the premium stock, not just the usual powdered bone and resin, but the tinctures and distillations, dark liquids and glass bottles labeled with looping Latin script. One is particularly striking, a deep maroon tincture that glows slightly when shaken. You've only handled it twice, and never without gloves. Serrano studies the bottles as if they hold answers to questions he's not yet allowed to ask. He finally selects one and lifts it to the light. How often do you dose this? He asks, your master. Twice daily, with warmed wine. And symptoms? Your master shrugs. Reported improvements in circulation. Fewer fevers. Less melancholia. Serrano raises an eyebrow. Or more faith in mystery. That earns a chuckle. But you notice your master doesn't contradict him. Later, while they talk, you're left to prepare a sample batch. Serrano watches you closely, perhaps. Too closely. You grind the ingredients carefully, adding measured drops of rose water and a trace of amber. He notes your precision with an approving nod. When the vial is sealed, he holds it delicately and says, you're too young to believe in phantoms, yet you mix them well. You're unsure if it's an insult or praise. As he prepares to leave, Serrano offers a final thought. The body wants stories as much as it wants medicine. And sometimes, stories are the stronger cure. After he's gone, your master mutters something under his breath. He speaks like a poet, but treats like a butcher. That night, you think about what Serrano said. About stories. You wonder if each dose you'd prepare is more narrative than cure. You wonder if the nobility of Venice believe in the bone de store, if they believe in the comfort it offers. Perhaps belief itself is the real ingredient. Historians still argue whether the use of Mumia was grounded in medical logic or cultural illusion. Some claim its popularity reflected a genuine belief in its restorative properties. Others suggest it was more fashion than function, a symbol of sophistication and wealth. The powdered dead became not just treatment, but status. To consume a pharaoh was to join him in legacy. A few radicals whispered darker theories, that nobles believed eating fragments of greatness might transfer power to their own blood, that the ritual became less about healing and more about consuming history. You've never seen anyone grow wiser from it, but you've seen them pay. The next day, a merchant's wife sends a servant with a strange request, a sachet of Mumia to be sewn into her infant's crib, not to treat illness, she clarifies, but to protect the child from nightmares. You nearly refuse. Your hand hovers over the storage cabinet, unsure, but business is business. You prepare the sachet. Later, you ask your master if he believes the dead can ward off dreams. He laughs. They can't even protect themselves, and yet the requests grow stranger. One man asks for powder to be mixed into ink for a letter he claims must carry weight beyond words. A widow requests it in her husband's funeral oil. A bishop demands enough to anoint the threshold of his chapel. You comply, always with care. You've become fluent in the language of the strange. And perhaps, beneath it all, you begin to feel something else too. Not belief, not reverence, but responsibility. These fragments you grind once belonged to people however distant, however ancient. You begin offering them small, silent acknowledgements before sealing each jar. Not prayers, just presence, a pause, a breath, a whisper of thanks. Sometimes, late in the evening, after your master has gone to sleep and the streets outside are quiet, you find yourself staring at the candlelight dancing on the wall. You imagine the faces of those whose bones now live on your shelves. You wonder if they'd be horrified, or if, somehow, they'd understand. You'll brush the dust from your apron, extinguish the flame, and close the ledger. Tomorrow, more stories will arrive in the form of orders, and you will mix them with care. You first hear the word miracle whispered in a tone too proud to be pious. It comes from the lips of a French courier, tall and perfumed, who stops at the apothecary, not to buy but to boast. He holds a scroll tied in silk ribbon, stamped with the fleur-de-lis, and speaks in bursts of velveted awe. The king, he says, voice low but theatrical, now swears by mummy powder. He pauses for effect, his gaze sweeping across the dusty shelves. Not just any batch, of course, only the finest, sourced from Thebes, blessed by time, fit for a monarch. You raise an eyebrow, but say nothing. You've grown used to still. Something in the courier's voice makes your master glance up from his tinctures. A flicker of interest crosses the old man's face. Who administered it? He asks. The royal physician himself. The courier replies with a smile. In front of half the court, he called it. The man's fingers flutter dramatically, a gift from antiquity itself. The words hang in the air like a perfume you can't name. That evening, your master locks the front door earlier than usual. He beckons you into the back room, where the older, more obscure texts are kept. He selects one from a high shelf, Gimejicamenchis and Chikorun, and flips carefully through its cracked pages until he finds a passage circled in ink. The bodies of the wise contain their essence long after death. In small measure, this essence heals the living. He doesn't need to explain. You understand. The words from the French court weren't just vanity. They've ignited a movement. Over the next few weeks, you feel the ripple effect. Nobles begin requesting French-style preparations, powdered mummy mixed not with common wine, but with rare infusions, violet liqueur, gold-leafed syrup, tinctures of saffron. They call them elixirs divine, and they demand yours be just as elegant. You spend days perfecting the texture, refining the grind, adjusting the scent. The goal is no longer merely medicine eats luxury. Healing has become performance. Each vial a stage, each dose a line in a silent script, and the audience is always watching. Soon after, your master receives an invitation rare and weighty. It is written in fine Italian and stamped with a noble crest you recognize from the merchant docks, the emblem of the House of Medici. The letter praises his skill with ancient remedies and invites him to demonstrate his craft at a gathering of physicians and alchemists in Florence. Your master, though honored, is too old for the journey. He sends you instead. The trip takes 8 days by coach, through frost-touched valleys and forests, thick with quiet. At night, you sleep with a sample satchel beneath your head, each vial swaddled in cloth, labeled and tied with black silk. The scent of Mumia follows you even in your dreams. When you arrive, the city hums with gold and ambition. You're led to a marble hall flanked by towering columns and filled with men in robes, some holding scrolls, others sniffing at jars like trained dogs. You're the youngest by decades. Your task is simple. Present your best preparation of Mumia to the court physician, a man known only as He's tall, hawk-nosed, dressed in black wool, and speaks slowly, as if weighing every syllable like coin. You hand him your finest batch. He uncorks the vial, sniffs it, and swirls it gently. The scent is pure, he murmurs. No mold, no salt air. You ground this yourself. You nod. He dabs a tiny amount onto his tongue and closes his eyes. When they open, he gives a curt nod. Acceptable. From anyone else, that would feel like a dismissal. From Leclerc, you know it is rare praise. He turns to the court and speaks in French-accented Latin. This, he holds up the vial, his legacy. This is not merely dust, but time, memory, power, in trace amounts. It speaks to the blood. It awakens what sleep cannot. A soft murmur spreads across the room. The word power hangs like a spell. Later, as servants wheel away trays of gilded cups and herbs, you overhear snippets of conversation. Some doctors whisper about incorporating Mumia into plague treatments. Others consider it an aphrodisiac. A few are skeptical, of course, but none deny its prestige. If the king uses it, One says, how can we not? Historians still argue whether this momentous endorsement by Leclerc in front of Florence's elite was what truly launched Mummies into continental fame. Some say it was merely symbolic, a gesture designed to cement France's dominance in matters of medicine and fashion alike. Others believe it marked a real shift in how Europe saw the dead not as history to study, but as substance to consume. You stay in Florence for 3 days. By the time you return, orders from nobles have tripled. Now, they want provenance, documents, descriptions of where each mummy was found, even drawings of the tombs. When you don't have that, you make it up. Everyone else does. One afternoon, you receive a private commission. A noblewoman in mourning sends a sealed letter requesting a delicate blend, ideally from a female subject of noble rank. She offers triple the standard fee. Your master considers the request, then nods. She wants to feel close to someone who suffered what she did. It's not medicine, it's kinship. You prepare the blend, carefully, silently. That night, your hands tremble slightly as you wipe down the bench, not from fear but from the weight of it all. You've begun to understand that Mummies isn't a cure, it's a story, retold again and again through powder, tincture, and ink. A story that people consume hoping to rewrite their own endings. You'll pause, then grind the next batch. The further you rise in reputation, the more tightly sealed the secrets become. There is little glamour left in the backroom benches of your apothecary. Only the quiet certainty that what you prepare will touch the mouths of people who shape the course of nations. And yet, none of that compares to the strange ritual you are about to be trained in the delivery of the remedy itself. Not by bottle, not by servant, but by tongue and memory. It begins with a whisper in the dead of morning. Your master summons you before the sun crests the rooftops, his ink-stained fingers clasped behind his back. He says nothing at first, simply hands you a folded parchment. You open it. No words, only symbols. A coded message. A trial. It takes you most of the morning to decipher the meaning. An old formula, written not in Latin but in phonetic glyphs meant to be spoken aloud, syllable for syllable, without alteration. When you read it out loud, it tastes strange in your mouth, like trying to pronounce someone else's memories. Your master listens in silence. When you finish, he nods. Again, he says, and again, and again. You learn that some clients no longer trust ink. In times of war and courtly sabotage, even the smallest misphrasing on paper can spark death. A word written poorly becomes an insult. A missing line can unravel treaties. So, messengers carefully trained, painfully precise have become the chosen vessels. You will be one of them. It isn't just about speech, it's about mimicry. You must learn to replicate the voice of the sender, his tone, his cadence, even his pauses. You must sound like him without ever becoming him. And the more important the message, the more crucial the performance. Your master teaches you the breathing patterns of nobles you've never met. He records them on wax cylinders, makes you listen again and again, until their rhythms become your own. Then you recite, with your head slightly tilted, with your breath steady, with your eyes unblinking. You're told that this, too, is a kind of medicine, a safeguard, a living prescription spoken into the ears of those who must not mishear. 1 week, you are summoned to deliver a spoken remedy to a Venetian lord. He is bedridden, afraid of paper, surrounded by doctors who speak only when spoken to. You kneel by his pillow and whisper the mixture aloud, first the ingredients, then the incantation-like dosage, then the parting phrase your master insists. You memorize. Drink with silence. Remember with fire. The Lord breathes easier by morning. No one thanks you, but they call again. In some cities, the messengers are revered as walking apothecaries. In others, they are feared, believed to carry not just medicine but secrets too dangerous to commit to parchment. A few are even executed, not for failure, but for knowing too much. You walk tightropes of loyalty, balancing vials in your bag and names in your memory. Historians still debate whether these couriers were respected agents of trust, or merely expendable shields in political mind games. Some documents suggest they were highly compensated. Others note how many were discarded after a single misstep. Perhaps both are true, revered in theory, discarded in practice, a paradox not uncommon in your world. One particularly strange assignment involves a letter that must be sung. You hand it sheet music along with the formula. He believes pitch changes the effect. Your master explains dryly. You think it's madness, but you'll learn the melody. When you deliver it to the Pashanta frail composer and Proggy weeps after the first verse, you do not ask why. On your return journey, you pass a fellow courier traveling in the opposite direction. You recognize him by the way he touches the pocket over his heart every 50 paces. A memory trigger. You do the same when you forget which blend includes basil, which one requires milk. These gestures, though invisible to others, form a secret language among messengers, a way of saying, I remember what must not be written. Sometimes, late at night, after a long ride or a strange delivery, you find yourself reciting ingredients aloud as you fall asleep, not to memorize them, but to feel less alone. Each whispered list becomes a kind of lullaby, a reminder that even decay can be named, bottled, and spoken. In one distant town, a client insists the remedy be recited to a rosebush in his garden every morning. The plant listens. He tells you solemnly. You don't argue. You kneel in the dirt and whisper about crushed petals and dry bones to a bloom that leans slightly toward your breath. The housekeeper later presses money into your palm without meeting your eyes. You never speak of it again. Eventually, you learn to speak multiple dialects. Your tongue becomes agile, your mind a locked chest. You begin to understand that this role isn't about accuracy. It's about presence. A message only lives if it carries a heartbeat. You become that heartbeat. Still, it wears you down. Your feet ache. Your throat stays raw. You cough powder even when you've had none for days, and yet you continue. You carry medicines through storms, through silence, through alleys, thick with rheum and eyes. You ride through midnight fog with a sealed envelope tied to your wrist and a warning not to open it, even if you fall. Sometimes, when you wake before dawn and see your own reflection, you wonder who you are. Apothecary or actor, healer or echo. You touch the small pouch of Mummies at your waist. You recite a recipe in your head just to feel grounded, and you ride forward into the dark. The further you rise in reputation, the more tightly sealed the secrets become. There is little glamour left in the backroom benches of your apothecary. Only the quiet certainty that what you prepare will touch the mouths of people who shape the course of nations. And yet, none of that compares to the strange ritual you are about to be trained in the delivery of the remedy itself. Not by bottle, not by servant, but by tongue and memory. It begins with a whisper in the dead of morning. Your master summons you before the sun crests the rooftops, his ink-stained fingers clasped behind his back. He says nothing at first, simply hands you a folded parchment. You open it. No words, only symbols. A coded message. A trial. It takes you most of the morning to decipher the meaning. An old formula, written not in Latin but in phonetic glyphs, meant to be spoken aloud, syllable for syllable, without alteration. When you read it out loud, it tastes strange in your mouth, like trying to pronounce someone else's memories. Your master listens in silence. When you finish, he nods. Again, he says, and again, and again. You learn that some clients no longer trust ink. In times of war and courtly sabotage, even the smallest misphrasing on paper can spark death. A word written poorly becomes an insult. A missing line can unravel treaties. So, messengers carefully trained, painfully precise have become the chosen vessels. You will be one of them. It isn't just about speech, it's about mimicry. You must learn to replicate the voice of the sender, his tone, his cadence, even his pauses. You must sound like him without ever becoming him. And the more important the message, the more crucial the performance. Your master teaches you the breathing patterns of nobles you've never met. He records them on wax cylinders, makes you listen again and again, until their rhythms become your own. Then you recite, with your head slightly tilted, with your breath steady, with your eyes unblinking. You're told that this, too, is a kind of medicine, a safeguard, a living prescription spoken into the ears of those who must not mishear. One week, you are summoned to deliver a spoken remedy to a Venetian lord. He is bedridden, afraid of paper, surrounded by doctors who speak only when spoken to. You kneel by his pillow and whisper the mixture aloud, first the ingredients, then the incantation-like dosage, then the parting phrase your master insists. You memorize. Drink with silence. Remember with fire. The Lord breathes easier by morning. No one thanks you, but they call again. In some cities, the messengers are revered as walking apothecaries. In others, they are feared, believed to carry not just medicine but secrets too dangerous to commit to parchment. A few are even executed, not for failure, but for knowing too much. You walk tightropes of loyalty, balancing vials in your bag and names in your memory. Historians still debate whether these couriers were respected agents of trust or merely expendable shields in political mind games. Some documents suggest they were highly compensated. Others note how many were discarded after a single misstep. Perhaps both are true, revered in theory, discarded in practice, a paradox not uncommon in your world. One particularly strange assignment involves a letter that must be sung. You hand it sheet music along with the formula. He believes pitch changes the effect. Your master explains dryly. You think it's madness, but you'll learn the melody. When you deliver it to the Pashanta frail composer and Proggy weeps after the first verse, you do not ask why. On your return journey, you pass a fellow courier traveling in the opposite direction. You recognize him by the way he touches the pocket over his heart every 50 paces. A memory trigger. You do the same when you forget which blend includes basil, which one requires milk. These gestures, though invisible to others, form a secret language among messengers, a way of saying, I remember what must not be written. Sometimes, late at night, after a long ride or a strange delivery, you find yourself reciting ingredients aloud as you fall asleep, not to memorize them, but to feel less alone. Each whispered list becomes a kind of lullaby, a reminder that even decay can be named, bottled, and spoken. In one distant town, a client insists the remedy be recited to a rosebush in his garden every morning. The plant listens. He tells you solemnly. You don't argue. You kneel in the dirt and whisper about crushed petals and dry bones to a bloom that leans slightly toward your breath. The housekeeper later presses money into your palm without meeting your eyes. You never speak of it again. Eventually, you learn to speak multiple dialects. Your tongue becomes agile, your mind a locked chest. You begin to understand that this role isn't about accuracy. It's about presence. A message only lives if it carries a heartbeat. You become that heartbeat. Still, it wears you down. Your feet ache. Your throat stays raw. You cough powder even when you've had none for days, and yet you continue. You carry medicines through storms, through silence, through alleys, thick with rumen eyes. You ride through midnight fog with a sealed envelope tied to your wrist and a warning not to open it, even if you fall. Sometimes, when you wake before dawn and see your own reflection, you wonder who you are. Apothecary or actor, healer or echo. You touch the small pouch of mumia at your waist. You recite a recipe in your head just to feel grounded, and you ride forward into the dark. You are not in Venice anymore. The city outside your window breathes differently, choppier and drier, with heat that curls parchment and stirs up thick yellow dust between the tiles. You've been sent to Cairo, not for sightseeing, but for procurement. The word itself so clean and bureaucratic cannot fully convey what's expected of you here. You've been tasked with the sourcing of new material, raw mummy, and not from merchants who buy wrapped relics by the pound. This time, you are to go closer to the source. The man you meet is neither an archaeologist nor a doctor. He calls himself a broker. His hands are smooth, his nails manicured, and he wears European clothing with just enough local flair to seem worldly. He meets you in a shaded cafe with sweet coffee and sweet lies. You want noble, he says, not just bone. You want someone whose name meant something. He grins like a stage actor. I can help. You learn quickly that in this trade, pedigree matters. Egyptian peasants buried hastily in shallow graves are no longer fashionable. What the elite of Europe now demand is distinction mummies pulled from painted tombs. Mummies with ankhs and amulets, mummies with facial features still intact, even in death. Vanity sells. The broker guides you through a cluttered warehouse on the edge of the city. Rows of sarcophagism cracked. Some half a pan line the floor like coffins at a silent auction. The air smells of mold, musk, and long-dried oil. You try not to breathe too deeply. He points out a specimen that has good color, as though he's selling you a melon. Look at the teeth, he says proudly, still white. You nod, uncertain how to respond. You feel more like a butcher than an apothecary. Still, you choose 2 specimens, negotiate a price, and arrange for shipment in crates labeled herbal supplies. Later, alone in your room, you cannot stop thinking about the eyes, or rather, the sockets where they used to be. You'd been told mummification removed all traces of the soul, but something in the tilt of that preserved head, something in the way the cloth had been wrapped with care, made you wonder who had done the wrapping and who they'd been grieving. Historians still debate whether the European trade in mummies during the Renaissance and Enlightenment was driven primarily by medical belief or by fetishistic The demand was real, but motives blur. Did they truly believe ground-up ancestors of the Nile healed melancholy? Or were they chasing the taste of forbidden antiquity? You are beginning to suspect it is both. After Cairo, your next stop is Marseille, where a retired surgeon teaches you a technique for detecting fake mummy powder counterfeit blends made from crushed bones, dirt, and animal resin. Burn it, he tells you. If it smells like roast pork, it's real. You stare at him, waiting for a laugh. There is none. This opens a new world of paranoia. You begin testing your own stock at night, crouching behind the apothecary furnace like a grave-robbing alchemist. Some batches pass, others make you gag. One blend smells sweet, too sweet like perfumed ash. Your master frowns when he samples it. Perfume is meant to mask rot, he says. Send that one back. Soon, the art of authentication becomes your new obsession. You'd collect samples, sort them by region, by scent, by powder consistency. Your bedroom smells like old teeth and incense. You begin to dream of bone dust falling like snow. Then, one day, an aristocrat requests something specific. A child, he writes, young The note is brief, unapologetic. You show it to your master in silence. He folds it twice and throws it into the fire. We do not fulfill that, he says. And you believe him, mostly. But doubts cling, like soot to the corners of the mind. The deeper you go into the trade, the more it resembles a story no one wants to tell in full. Behind every request is a shrug. Behind every vial, a vanished identity. You begin to wonder if the power they believe in the supposed healing force lies not in the bones themselves, but in the refusal to confront what those bones once meant. One week, you receive a parcel from Alexandria. It contains not a mummy, but scrolls translations of ancient Egyptian medical recipes. Most are incomprehensible. One lists crocodile dung as a key ingredient in fertility spells. Another recommends honey and ground lapis lazuli for sore throats. But then you find a passage describing a ritual of breath preservation in which the dying are anointed with resin and whispers to preserve their essence. You read it again, resin and whispers. The words sit uncomfortably close to your own practice. Could the ancient Egyptians have believed that voice, when spoken into the dead, lingered? Could this belief have been twisted, carried, reinterpreted by centuries of apothecaries? You don't know, but something about it changes the way you speak your recipes aloud. You start pausing between ingredients. You start listening after you finish, as if someone might whisper back. In a letter from a colleague in Paris, you learn of a rival who has begun selling mummy blends infused with peacock feather dust. He says it enhances clarity. The letter says, I say he's insane, but the rival is thriving. Soon, you're being asked for blends that sparkle, blends that match the phases of the moon. You want an object, but you know too well that in this world, belief often matters more than fact. Your master reminds you of the old rule. If it works, it's true, even if it isn't. You look at your shelf of jars. Some contain real mummy, some might not, but they all go to the same place, into someone's hope, into someone's ritual, into someone's mouth. You prepare the next batch slowly, choosing each herb with care, blending powder so fine it could pass for cinnamon. You seal it in wax. You write the label in perfect script, and you send it away. You never learn what happens next. You're sent to deliver a special package, nothing out of the ordinary. Just another jar of mamia, mixed with crushed cinnamon and elderflower too. A manor house on the edge of the Venetian lagoon. The fog hangs low that morning, cloaking the canals in silence. As your gondola glides through the still water, you feel the weight of the jar in your satchel, nestled like an egg of ancient secrets. The client is waiting on the second floor, an aging scholar who insists on seeing you alone. His study is unlike any you've ever entered, walls covered in ancient maps, anatomical sketches, and strange symbols drawn in chalk on the floor. The air smells like candle wax, ink, and something else you can't name perhaps. Dried blood. He wears gloves when he handles the jar, and as he sets it down on his desk, he invites you to sit. He doesn't ask for your credentials. He only asks a question. Do you believe consciousness can linger in the body after death? The way he says it, low and expectant, makes you feel like an apprentice all over again. You say nothing. Instead, you watch as he removes a bone fragment from a velvet pouch and places it beside the jar. This, he whispers, was from a priestess. 3rd dynasty, her skull had gold leaf fused into the bone. His eyes glint with the kind of hunger that only academics and madmen share. When I burn this, he adds, I sometimes hear music. You're unsure whether to nod or leave, but he's already moved on, now asking if Mumia should be taken orally or applied topically. I've tried both, he admits. Neither killed me. He laughs, but his laughter echoes oddly, like a cough that's lost its fear. You're used to eccentric clients, but this one is different. He offers to pay you not just for the blend, but for time, conversation, theory. He wants to know what you've seen, what variations you've handled, whether you've ever dreamt of the people inside the powders. You lie and say no. That night, back in your room above the apothecary, you dreamed vividly for the first time in months. You were walking through a marketplace of bones. No vendors, no buyers, just shelves upon shelves of ribs, skulls, and wrapped, limb-stacked, neatly like fine books, waiting to be read. You wake, sweating, but strangely calm. From then on, you notice something odd that blends you, prepare, feel, charged. As if the more you learn, the more precise your hands become, the more attention the powders command. Clients report faster recoveries. Some say they feel ancient memories, like visions caught between sleep and waking. One woman claims she saw a sun god whisper in her dream. A child said she floated above a river lined with gold. Your master shrugs when you tell him, sometimes people need their pain to have a story. He says, even if it's not true. But you wonder, historians still debate whether the psychological effects of Mumia use were placebo or something more. Did belief awaken dormant sensations? Or was the blend itself somehow active chemically, spiritually, culturally? Perhaps it was both. You've seen men weep at the scent alone, before a single dose is taken. Can belief steep the body like tea? Your next journey brings you to a hidden chapel used by a secretive sect of healers, who blend ancient Egyptian rites with Christian mysticism. Their altar is simple. Stone, slab, candles, a copper bowl. In the bowl Mumia, soaked in red wine and left to dry. You're told it enhances the vibrational resonance. You try not to react. They ask you to recite your standard formula aloud. You do. And when you finish, a woman with veiled eyes takes your hand and murmurs a blessing in a language you don't recognize. You leave with more coins than expected and a bundle of herbs you've never seen before. When you show the herbs to your master, he frowns. Hemlock and hembane, he says. They're either fools or prophets. From then on, you begin keeping a private notebook. Not recipes, those are recorded elsewhere. This one is for reactions, descriptions, outcomes. You list the blends, clients requested, the emotions they reported, even the dreams they described. Some entries feel like confessionals. One reads, merchant age 63, claimed to speak with his dead wife after smelling blend, returned to by a second jar, died 2 weeks later. You don't know whether the blend helped or harmed. You only know it felt real enough to him. Eventually, patterns emerge. Rose-based blends often bring peace. Myrrh causes vivid dreams. Cedarwood mixed with powdered skull triggers headaches in some, clarity in others. You begin refining your formulas not based on need, but intention. A blend for memory, a blend for release, a blend for goodbye. This is when the requests become more specific. A widow wants a scent to erase guilt. A general requests a powder to remember lost comrades. A monk asks for something to induce holy visions. You oblige them all. One day, while preparing a particularly complex blend, you drop the jar. The powder spills across your workbench, catching in the candlelight like dust from a comet. For a moment, the room is utterly silent. You don't move. You simply stare. And in that stillness, you think you hear something, a whisper, maybe, or the sound of breath, or memory. You sweep it into the waste bin. But that night, you write, today, I lost a blend, but I gained a silence I hadn't heard before. You are sent to a It isn't your first time visiting men of faith, but this place feels different. The building is ancient, nestled in a grove outside Bologna, its walls grown over with moss and half-whispered stories. The air is cool here, even in the heat of summer, and it smells like iron, incense, and long-decayed parchment. You're told the monks have a private collection. They've requested consultation, not transaction 8. They insisted on you, by name. You arrive carrying only a small leather pouch. Inside, 4 blends of mummy-based compounds. a few measuring tools, and a list of questions. You're not sure which one unnerves you, more what you're expected to bring, or what they might already know. The abbot greets you with a bowed head and a face like cracked marble. He barely speaks. He gestures for you to follow him down a stone corridor lit by oil lamps in recessed alcoves. Their light flickers against walls that breathe dust. It feels like you've entered the stomach of a sleeping god. They take you to the crypt. You expected a library, a chamber of texts and dried herbs, perhaps, but no, it's here, underground, where they've stored the relics. There are shelves of bones, sealed jars, fragments of cloth, too fragile to lift. One wall is lined with labeled skulls, each one bearing a name, date, and a curious symbol etched in red. Your guide stops in front of a small altar. Upon it rests a glass vial containing what looks like coarse sand and flakes of something darker brown, almost black. "We believe this came from a martyr," he says softly. "We've tried to use it medicinally, but it behaves strangely. You are invited to test it." At first glance, it resembles La Grade Mumia, the kind merchants sometimes pass off as authentic when stocks are low. But the smell is wrong, richer, more fermented. You open it slowly, allowing a thin ribbon of the scent to reach your nose. It's not unpleasant, just odd, like dried roses left in a cellar. A sweetness turned bitter. You run basic tests. Heat, water, vinegar. The substance reacts mildly to each, but never dissolves. It clings to the vessel like memory to skin. Later, in the refectory, you're shown manuscripts that mention the use of saintly remains in remedies spouted femurs of martyrs used to treat plague, slivers of sacred ribs pressed into wax for fevers. You knew such practices existed in the past, of course, but to see them documented with such precision and preserved in practice, and holiness has texture, one monk says with a knowing look. The body remembers more than we do. You ask how the monastery obtained its samples. He only smiles and changes the subject. Historians still debate whether the church truly believed in the medicinal power of relics, or whether the practice was driven by politics, control, and spectacle. Some say healing was secondary. What mattered was the sense of proximity to the divine, the performative trust in physical faith. Others argue the line between medicine and mysticism was never clear to begin with. That night, you're given a cell of your own Spartan, candlelit, its floor uneven with age. You lie awake listening to the wind moan through narrow windows, wondering if the dead stored below you can hear thoughts. You wonder what they'd think of your jar of prepared blends resting by the bed. You wonder if they envy your breath. The following morning, you assist with a ritual. It's not religious, at least not formally. A monk with a chronic cough requests one of your blends. You prepare it with care, using your middle-grade powder and a touch of mint. He inhales it deeply, eyes fluttering closed. After a moment, he murmurs something. "I see the sea." Then he laughs quietly and thanks you. You are not sure what he saw. You only know it worked, somehow. In return, they show you their hidden herb garden sunlight slicing through grapevines, rosemary thick in the air. Among the basil and sage is a strange grey-green plant with curling leaves. Dreamleaf, the abbot says. Very rare. We blend it with relic ash for visions. He offers you a cutting. You accept it with both hands. You leave the monastery a day later, your pouch heavier than before, blends gifted, not sold. As your cart rolls back toward the city, you feel oddly reverent, as if you've been walking among not just bones, but echoes. That evening, while organizing your workbench, you find the cutting of Dreamleaf tucked beside your spice jars. You don't label it, you just let it rest. The experience haunts you in soft, persistent ways. You begin incorporating tiny rituals into your own blending, not prayers, but pauses, quiet attention, a steady hand. You begin to speak softly while mixing, not for clients, but for the ingredients. One night, while grinding a particularly coarse bone sample, you feel a sudden heat rise in the pestle. Not fire, just warmth, like breath. You stop, you wait. It fades. You don't write it down. But you remember, and the next morning, without fanfare, you remove 3 older jars from your shelf and discard their contents in the garden. Not because they're spoiled, but because they've stopped responding. You don't speak of it, not to your master, not to yourself. But in that silence, something shifts. You are no longer just an apprentice blending powders. You are something in between. You're summoned by a painter. That alone is not unusual. Artisans often request your blends for sleep, for nerves, for lingering pain in the wrists and back. But this man, Lucien, by name, wants something stranger. Not for his body, not even for his mind. He wants your powders for his palate. The studio is a converted attic overlooking the Arno River. Tall windows cast a gentle grey light over half-finished portraits and open crates of pigments. The air smells of linseed oil, chalk dust, and violets. Oddly enough, Lucien greets you with a distracted nod, his hands already stained in shades of ochre and green. You set your satchel down carefully, unsure how to proceed. "I've heard of your craft," he says, not looking at you. "I want to try something ancient." You ask what he means. He pulls out a small, corked vial from his shelf. Inside powdered mummy, finer than yours, darker, too. He holds it like a precious stone. "Bought it from a merchant in Toulouse," he mutters. "Supposed to be royal He uncorks it and lets the scent curl out into the room. It's faint, but distinct, like ink rubbed into dry leather. He explains that for years now, some artists, especially in France and Italy, have experimented with mummy brown, a pigment made by grinding ancient human remains and mixing the powder with oil. They say it produces a warm, shadowy tone unlike any other, earthy, soft, and eternal. He believes it captures not just color, but history, memory." You are silent for a moment. Then you offer your own sample, more recent, less aged, but purer in preparation. He dips a brush into the mix and swipes it across a blank canvas. The stroke is dark amber, fading into a soft brownish gray. He steps back, squints, and exhales. "Yes," he says, "yes, that's what I wanted." Over the next few hours, he tells you about his vision. A portrait of death, not as a monster, but as a mirror. A quiet woman with tired eyes, draped in linens like old saints. "I want her skin to shimmer like forgotten pages," he murmurs. "I want her shadow to weigh something." You're not sure what he means, but you admire his obsession. As he works, you walk the edges of the studio. You find jars of crushed lapis, powdered charcoal, dried beetles, and a bundle of rose thorns. Painters are alchemists in their own way. They blend history with desire, image with myth, and now they blend it with flesh. Historians still argue about the extent to which mummy pigment was used in classical European art. Some say it was a rare novelty, favored only by eccentric masters. Others claim it was far more widespread, so common, in fact, that art restoration experts today can sometimes detect human DNA in oil paint flakes scraped from Renaissance portraits. You wonder what those painted figures would say if they could speak, knowing they were born not just of oil and brush, but of bone and time. Lucien finishes his first layer and steps aside. The figure on the canvas is only rough, but already haunting sunken eyes, gentle mouth, a suggestion of wisdom wrapped in sadness. "She looks like she remembers," he says. You nod. The next day, you return with more powder, and this time, a blend infused with clove and resin. It deepens the color, adds a sweetness to the smell. Lucien seems pleased. He speaks less now, working with intense, silent focus. You spend hours in the corner of his studio, grinding, measuring, watching. One afternoon, as he rests between layers, he asks if you've ever painted. You say no. He offers you a brush. "Anyway, make something ugly," he says. Ugly is true. You hesitate, but you dip your brush into a diluted mix and drag it across the edge of a discarded canvas. The result is uneven, childish, but something about the way the pigment clinks, how it breathes into the fabric, feels meaningful. It feels alive. You step away quickly. He doesn't comment, just nods. That evening, you write in your private notebook. Mummy pigment sits differently on canvas. It absorbs light. It swallows it. It's not color, it's memory. Pretending. You begin to notice more artists asking for shadow tones. Some request mixtures by Lucien's blend, Cairo, umber, pharaonic gray. You oblige them. Not all use them on portraits. Some use them on religious iconography, others on landscape. One paints only bones. You start to suspect that the dead are being remembered in strange new ways, not just swallowed, but framed, displayed, revered. Art, it seems, has its own form of resurrection, but not everyone approves. Your master finds out and frowns deeply. Medicine is one thing, he says. A painting is indulgence. You argue that perhaps it's no less sacred. He doesn't reply. The next time you visit Lucien, the portrait is nearly finished. The figure's eyes are complete, now brown and wet, and impossibly human. "She's almost here," he says. You feel a chill. That evening, while cleaning your tools, you pause and stare at a small pile of unused pigment. You think about the woman it once belonged to. Her name, lost. Her story, erased. But now, her presence hangs in paint, in linen, in shadow. You whisper a thank you, just in case. You're not sure when exactly the whispers begin, but they grow louder with each passing week, first as hushed mutterings behind shop counters, then as murmured hesitations during client visits, and finally as direct, unblinking questions from people who used to trust without pause. "Are you certain this works?" they ask. "Is it real, Mummy?" You nod, you reassure, you smile in that soft way that says yes, without needing to explain the details. But the truth lingers at the edges of your thoughts like the ever-present dust on your shelves. Things are changing. You feel it in the way your jars now look older, not because of time, but because of perception, like something from a past people are slowly beginning to reject. You spend more and more time restocking, not because the demand has grown, but because the hesitation has. Clients ask more questions now, and when they leave with smaller packets than before. Some request alternatives, European herbs, dried bark, mineral tonics. A woman you've served for years now flinches slightly when you place the jar of Mummy on the counter, as if it's begun to smell more strongly than before, though you know it hasn't changed. Something in the public has shifted, and you suspect it began with the young scholars. They come from the university, bright-eyed, proud-spined, always speaking in lectures, even when no one's asked. They wear their skepticism like medals, quoting new thinkers, referencing anatomical dissections and blood circulation and chemical balances. They talk of progress as if it's a train they're already on, and everyone else is chasing behind on foot. You've watched them in the lecture halls and taverns, sipping spiced wine while tearing apart centuries of medical traditions with laughter. "That's just a bit too loud. Ground-up pharaohs," one said last week, and people still wonder why medicine didn't help. Another chuckled and added, "Half of them probably snorted limestone." You listen quietly from your usual corner. You don't interrupt. You don't defend. You've learned that arguing with those who've already decided is like trying to catch steam in a bottle, but their words still settle somewhere inside you, and that night you find yourself lingering over your own mixtures longer than usual. You open the lid of your freshest batch and inhale, not to question, not even to remember, but to reassure yourself that something sacred still exists within it. Historians still debate whether the decline of Mummies and Renaissance medicine was caused by the rise of modern anatomy, by the growing discomfort with the ethics of consumption. Some argue it was simple, practical. Tibeta cures replaced older beliefs. Others suggest there was a deeper revulsion that surfaced as people became more aware of what the substance truly was. After all, it's easier to swallow a medicine when you don't imagine the face that once wore the bone. You begin preparing new blends with more care, not because the process demands it, but because you now feel the need to justify its worth, if not to your clients, then to yourself. You add gentler herbs to the powder, lavender for calming, lemon balm for brightness, a touch of camphor to soothe the scent. The result is softer on the nose, easier on the throat, and perhaps more symbolic than medicinal. You aren't sure if it works better, but people seem more comfortable accepting it. They don't ask as many questions when the jar smells like a summer garden. One day, a physician visits your shop, not a customer, not a friend, just a stranger with the smooth confidence of someone who believes deeply in charts and clean tools. He walks the shelves slowly, hands behind his back, lips pursed as if evaluating a student. When he reaches the Mummies, he stops. Still, he says, "That's all." Just that one word, laced with quiet judgment. You don't reply. He doesn't buy anything. You're glad when he leaves. You sit for a long time afterward, the shop empty and still. You stare at the rows of jars, the handwritten labels, the amber hues of the dusted glass. It all feels older today, not aged, just out of place, as if time itself has politely moved on, and you're still waiting for it to circle back. Then, late one afternoon, a man returns. You remember him from years ago, tall, graying, with a limp that had grown worse each winter. He used to ask for small portions of Mummies, claiming it helped with the dull ache in his knees. But he hasn't visited in nearly a year. Now he walks slowly, leaning heavily on a carved stick. His coat is patched, his voice is thinner, but his eyes are clear. "Do you still have the old blend?" he asks. "The one with rose and myrrh." You nod. He smiles, and it is a smile of comfort, not hope. He doesn't ask for proof, or studies, or new explanations. He just takes the packet, presses a few coins into your palm, and leaves without another word. You hold the warmth of the exchange a little longer than necessary, grateful not for the transaction, but for the reminder. Some still believe, some still remember. The next day, you receive a letter from a young apothecary across the city. She wants to learn your methods not because she uses Mumia, but because she wants to understand why people once did. She writes with respect, not dismissal. You agree to meet. Over tea, she asks thoughtful questions. You answer honestly. You tell her about the jars, the preparation, the strange reverence people used to hold for death when it was seen as a cure rather than a threat. She listens carefully, her notes neat and deliberate. When you finish, she says something unexpected. Even if it didn't heal, it gave people comfort, and maybe that's enough. You don't reply, but later that night, you write those words in your notebook and underline them twice. As spring approaches, fewer people ask for Mumia. The trend is fading not in scandal, not in flames, just in soft, inevitable drift. You begin using the storage jars for other things, dried fruits, saffron, powdered coral. You leave one jar untouched, the one that smells faintly of old parchment and desert air. You keep it at the far end of the shelf, not for use, but for memory. You awaken before the bell tower rings. The sky is still dim, shaded in early violet, and the streets are hushed under the breath of night's last whisper. There's something about this hour that feels sacred, as though the city itself hasn't decided who it'll be. Today, healer or fraud, priest or executioner. You tie your apron slowly, fingertips tracing the frayed strings like a ritual, and move to the back of the shop where your latest shipment lies waiting. It arrived last night, cloaked in linen and silence, and you haven't yet had the courage to unfasten it. Today, you do. The cloth peels back with a soft rasp. Beneath it lies what you've come to expect. The brittle curve of a rib cage, a folded arm still wrapped in ancient bandages, the unmistakable darkened sheen of resin-soaked flesh. You no longer gasp, you no longer flinch. But there is a moment, brief and internal, when you wonder again who this was. Not what, but who, and whether anyone ever whispered their name while they were alive. You begin the grinding process slowly. First, the bones must be separated from the remaining tissue, then dried over low coals, until they're light enough to fracture with mortar and pestle. The scent is not one you describe. Aloud it clings to your clothes and your sleep, but it's familiar, comforting, in a way only repetition can be. You've done this for years. Your hands know the rhythm. Your body remembers even when your thoughts wander. As the dust begins to form, you find yourself drifting backward, not forward. You remember your first shipment. You were 17, hands to clean, eyes to eager. You thought the act sacred, the practice mysterious. Your master never explained where the bodies came from, and you never asked. But you remember how he held the first jar to the light and said, with quiet certainty, "This is older than any cathedral in France." You believed him, and when you sold your first portion to a woman desperate to cure her son's fever, you believed it mattered. Now, the belief has worn thin, and yet the ritual remains. Today, your client is not desperate. He is powerful, a merchant prince with rings on each finger and a wife too young to remember the last plague. He does not ask for healing. He asks for longevity. He asks for clarity of mind, for strength in old age. You offer him a blend of Mumia saffron and crushed mint leaves sweetened with candied ginger to mask the aftertaste. He doesn't flinch. He raises the vial like a chalice and swallows it all in one practiced motion. Then he smiles. They say, he begins, that pharaohs drank this every morning, that it connects the blood to ancient wisdom. You nod, though you know better. That particular story is apocryphal, fabricated by a 15th century apothecary in Prague to increase prices during a drought. Still, it works. The merchant leaves satisfied, and you remain behind, wondering if half of medicine is merely the art of constructing belief sturdy enough to hold back fear. Historians still debate whether Mumia was genuinely respected by its practitioners, or whether it was knowingly sold as myth cloaked in exoticism. Some argue that doctors understood its limitations, but offered it as psychological comfort. Others suggest the mystique of Egypt held such sway. Over Renaissance minds that they couldn't help but believe its dust held power. After all, this was the era when scholars translated dreams and dissected meaning from comet trails. That evening, you take inventory. The back shelf has grown crowded with substitutes: frankincense, sandalwood, minerals boiled down to shimmering residue. Fewer clients request pure Mummies now. Some prefer the hybrids. Others claim the old powder makes them nauseous. You don't blame them. It smells stronger these days, more like earth and less like myth. Or maybe your nose has simply grown honest. There is, however, one man who keeps returning. He arrives always after dark, cloaked and alone, and never gives his name. His coin is always warm, as if held tightly for too long, and his voice is brittle with age. He never asks for anything but the same mixture: powdered mummy, rose, petal ash, and clove oil. You pack it for him without speaking. He bows deeply and vanishes into the mist. You do not follow, but you wonder. Once, out of curiosity, you asked your master who these men were. He only said, "There are those who don't seek healing. They seek connection." Something older than logic. You understand that now. Because sometimes, when the shop is quiet and the moonlight spills across your table, you feel the presence of the past. Not ghosts, never that, but memory, texture, the soft weight of lives, long extinguished, still pressing gently on the present, like fingerprints in clay. You breathe it in, you let it settle, you do not push it away. One night, a student visits. She's no older than you were when you began, but she carries herself like someone raised on books rather than blood. She asks questions, real ones, not the polite kind, Dan. She listens with a depth that startles you. You show her the blends, the tools, the process. She doesn't recall, but when she holds a jar of powdered bone in her hand, she frowns. "Do you think they'd consent to this?" she asks. The question is simple, clean, surgical. You have no answer. She thanks you anyway. After she leaves, you sit for a long time beside your largest jar and run your fingers over its label. The ink is faded, the handwriting is not yours, and for the first time, you wonder if it was ever meant to last. There's a growing awareness in the city, whispers of reform, talks of regulation. The church has begun to reconsider what is sacred and what is desecration. You've seen leaflets condemning the practice. You've heard rumors of arrests in the south, but for now, you are untouched. You remain a figure of habit, not heresy, a relic of an age that hasn't yet decided whether to bury you or preserve you in amber. And so, you keep working. You wake early, you grind slowly, you sell quietly. You wonder often, now if any of it will be remembered. Not your name, not your shop. Just the idea that, once upon a time, people believed so deeply in the power of the dead that they turned it into medicine. And that belief, even if misplaced, carried its own kind of grace. You've started keeping a ledger not of sales, but of thoughts. It's tucked between two recipe books behind the counter, its spine fraying like an old shoelace. In it, you write notes that never make it into your apothecary records, observations, questions, things you'd never say aloud. Some entries are as short as a sentence. He looked at the jar like it was a confession. Others stretch into paragraphs, detailing the way certain clients clutch their vials, as if holding something sacred or dangerous. This is how you make sense of what's changing, not just in the shop, but in the world beyond your wooden door. Word has spread that the king's court no longer endorses the use of mummies. One of his physicians publicly declared it a cannibalistic indulgence, dressed in the language of science, and the announcement has echoed through the city like the tolling of a slow funeral bell. You don't deal with the court directly, but your customers do, and now they come in with hesitation, with glances cast over their shoulders. Some still buy, but their voices are quieter. Their coin is folded in cloth. Their eyes ask for reassurance. You give them what they want, but the ledger still fills. One day, a priest enters your shop. Not in uniform, his collar is tucked under a traveler's coat, but the posture gives him away. He lingers near the back shelf, where the oldest jars sit in shadow. He doesn't touch anything, doesn't speak until you approach. Then, in a voice low and steady, he says, "Have you ever asked if the soul lingers when the body is crushed?" You blink. It's not a question anyone has ever asked you, not like that, not so plainly. You try to respond with something measured, something respectful, but he only nods, as if he didn't expect an answer anyway. Then he leaves, and the door creaks closed behind him with a finality that sits in your chest for hours afterward. That night, you open one of the larger jars and stare at its contents. The powder is fine, almost silken. It clumps slightly in the corners where moisture has crept in. You dip a finger inside, not to taste, not to test, just to feel. It's smoother than you expect, cold, even after all this time, and you wonder. There's a growing conversation among scholars about the ethics of sourcing. Some argue that many of the so-called mummies used in medicine were never truly Egyptian. Bodies were taken from local burial grounds, from plague pits, from criminals, wherever preservation was good enough to pass. Once ground into powder, all bones looked the same. And once labeled Mumia, who could tell? You've heard tales of entire caravans arriving at port labeled ancient remains, only to contain nothing more than sun-dried corpses and soot-darkened linen. But they sell. They always sell. The illusion is stronger than the proof. Still, you start asking more questions of your suppliers. You request documentation, formal, just ... assurances. Most scoff. One laughs and says, "You're selling miracles, not meat." Who cares where it came from? You care. At least now you do. You begin crafting a new blend, one without any mumia. It includes ground violet root, powdered myrrh, sage ash, and poppy resin. You name it, ash of memory. A soft, poetic lie. You place it near the front counter, just beside the drying rack. It smells floral. They just nod and buy. And somehow, that feels worse. Because now you're part of the deception, not of the past, but of the present. And yet, you don't stop. You tell yourself it's mercy, that perhaps some people need the ritual more than they ever needed the remedy. One morning, a widow enters the shop. She's thin, wrapped in grey wool, her hair She doesn't speak at first, just stands in the doorway, staring at the jars. Finally, she steps forward and places a small coin purse on the counter. "My husband swore by your powders," she says. "He said they kept his mind clear. I never tried them before, but now I can't sleep." You offer her the new blend. She smells it, nods slowly, and clutches the packet to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. "I just want to remember how he felt." You don't correct her. You don't explain what's missing from the jar. She walks away believing it contains some part of the past. And in a strange way, it does. Later that week, a letter arrives. It's written in a precise hand, ink dark and deliberate. It's from a young doctor at the university, one who has heard of your reputation and wants to meet. He speaks not of accusations, but of understanding. "The old ways are dying," he writes, "but those who remember them still matter." You agree to the meeting. He arrives at dusk, bringing with him a bottle of port and 2 worn notebooks. You sit by candlelight, trading stories. He doesn't mock you. He doesn't try to convert you. Instead, he listens and asks real questions, thoughtful ones. At one point, he holds a jar of mumia and turns it slowly in his hands. "Do you ever wonder," he asks, "if we've misunderstood the past completely?" You smile, just slightly, all the time. You say, "He leaves with a sample of your herbal blend and a promise to return." Whether he will or not, you don't know. But the encounter leaves something behind. The faint impression of future coexisting gently with the past. You write in your ledger that night, a longer entry than usual. You mention the priest, the widow, the doctor. You write their words, their silences, their choices, and then you write one final sentence, underlined twice. "Sometimes belief is the last kindness we can offer." As the city grows louder with change, your shop grows quieter, but not emptier. People still come. They still ask. They still hope. And you, for now, still answer. It begins with a rumor, a whisper on the wind, carried between candlelit tables and whispered in apothecary doorways. A new decree is coming, one that might end it all. You don't believe it at first. Decrees are always coming, but few ever land. But then the first letter arrives, not a friendly note, but an official document, sealed in red wax, delivered by a courier who doesn't make eye contact. The crest is unmistakable. The wording is sterile, careful, but the meaning is blunt. All trade and sale of mumia and corporeal remains for medical use is to cease, effective immediately. You hold the letter for a long time before setting it down. Then you sit, hands motionless, eyes fixed on nothing. It's not shock. It's not even anger. It's a strange quiet, as though the air itself has forgotten how to move. Outside, the city continues. The bells ring. The market roars. A boy laughs down the alley with a loaf of stolen bread. But inside your shop, something ancient exhales for the last time. You don't rush to hide your stock. You don't burn your jars. You simply stand, move toward the back room, and begin organizing carefully, reverently, as if preparing for a burial. Each container is wiped, labeled, and sealed. Some you place on the high shelves. Others go into crates, padded with herbs. You don't know where they'll end up. You only know they won't be ground again. A final client arrives that afternoon. A woman you've never seen before, young, elegant, with gloves that cost more than your month's rent. She doesn't look around. She walks straight to the counter and asks for real Mumia. Not substitutes. Not herbs. The original. You shake your head. She's too late. She doesn't argue. Instead, she sighs, almost with relief. "I was afraid you'd say yes," she says. Then she turns and walks out. Historians still debate whether the ban came from ethics, politics, or fear of scandal. Some say the church grew uneasy with the rising awareness of the dead being consumed as commodity. Others argue that physicians themselves began to view the practice as outdated and grotesque. Still, others suggested diplomatic pressure from Egypt itself, from scholars appalled by the desecration of cultural heritage. Whatever the reason, the age of powdered ancestors ends not with fire, but with silence. You notice it gradually, like fog lifting. Fewer clients, fewer ships labeled in dusty Latin. Even the supplier who once joked about mummy vintages goes quiet. The shelf where your largest jar once sat now holds jars of mint and gentian root. More benign, more forgettable, but you don't forget. You still open the ledger. You still write. Not about clients now, but about memory, about silence, about what it meant to sell history in a jar. Your final batch of Mumia sits sealed beneath the floorboards. You keep no sign of it. You tell no one. But on rare evenings, when the wind howls and the windows rattle, you open the crate and let your fingers rest on the old labels. You don't open them. You don't need to. You remember the nobleman who licked it from his finger, the widow who clutched her packet like it contained love itself, the priest who asked about souls, the student who frowned, and you remember yourself young, eager, trusting. You wonder how the future will judge you. Not harshly, you hope, but honestly, because you didn't invent this practice. You inherited it, you preserved it, and in your own way, you ended it. Not with defiance, but with care, with stillness, with a ledger full of ghosts. Now, the bell above your door no longer rings, but you still sweep the floor each morning. You still light a candle at dusk, and sometimes, when a curious student passes by and presses their nose to the glass, you smile and wave. You don't invite them in. Not yet, but maybe someday, because history never truly dies. It sleeps, and some nights, when the wind is soft and the moon high, you swear you can still hear the whisper of powdered bones in the quiet. The candle flickers low on the counter, its wax pooled and quiet. Outside, the city exhales into night, and the sounds of footsteps grow fewer, fainter, until even the cobblestones seem to rest. You sit back in your wooden chair, arms loose, eyelids heavy, the pages of your ledger cooling beneath your fingertips. There's nothing left to write. Not tonight. The old jars are still, undisturbed. No more grinding, no more mixing. The tools hang clean and unused, and you, after so many years, are simply still. For once, you are not preparing, not measuring, not mourning or hoping. You're just here, breathing in the soft quiet, letting memories settle like dusk upon the city. You picture the dunes of a land you've never seen, sun-baked bones cradled by time, untouched by merchants or myth. You wonder if they rest more easily now. You hope they do, and you let that thought linger, warm and unspoken, like a blanket over tired limbs. Your thoughts drift to simpler things. The scent of the comfort of repetition, the way a story can outlive even its teller. You think about what it means to hold the past gently, to let it fade with dignity. And then, without meaning to, you close your eyes. Let the breath slow. Let the weight go. Let the dust settle. You've done enough for one lifetime.